This 1920 portrait holds a mystery that no one has ever truly solved until now. The basement archive of the Greenwood County Historical Society smells of aged paper and dry dust. James Mitchell, a 38-year-old genealogist from Chicago, carefully studies a leather-bound ledger that lists property transfers from 1920 Mississippi. He has been researching land records for a client all morning, finding nothing but normal transactions. At 4:30, with the archive about to close, James reaches for one last box, marked Miscellaneous Personal Effects, 1918 to 1925. Inside, wrapped in thin tissue paper, he discovers a stack of photographs worn by time and humidity. Then he notices it. The photograph is surprisingly well preserved, mounted on thick cardboard. The studio stamp reads Crawford Photography, Greenwood, Mississippi, March 1920. It shows a formal family portrait. A black couple sits in the center, dignified in their best clothes. The man wears a pressed dark suit, his expression calm and proud. The woman's hands rest gently in her lap, her dark dress neat, her eyes meeting the camera with quiet strength. 3 children stand with them. 2 girls about 8 and 10 years old wear white dresses with ribbons tied in their carefully braided hair. But it is the 3rd child that makes James stop cold. Between the 2 girls stands a boy of about 7. His skin is pale, his hair is light brown and wavy. Even in the sepia tones, his eyes are clearly light-colored. The boy is unmistakably white. James leans in closer, studying every detail. The boy stands naturally, the man's hand resting protectively on his shoulder. There is no stiffness, no forced pose. He belongs there. James turns the photograph over. In faded pencil are the names Samuel, Clara, Ruth, Dorothy, and Thomas. March 14th, 1920. He takes a picture of it with his phone and writes the names in his notebook. His thoughts race. In 1920 Mississippi, during the era of Jim Crow segregation, a black family raising a white child would have been unthinkable, dangerous, possibly deadly. James approaches the archivist, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. "Do you know anything about this family?" he asks, showing her the photograph. Mrs. Patterson studies it, something moving across her face. Maybe recognition, maybe memory. "That would be Samuel and Clara Johnson," she says softly. "A respected family. He was a carpenter. She did sewing work. And the children." She pauses. "I have heard stories, old stories, the kind people stopped speaking about." She glances at the clock. "If you want to understand that photograph, talk to Evelyn Price. She is 93 and lives at Magnolia Gardens. Her mother knew the Johnsons." Mrs. Patterson allows James to keep the photograph. "No one has claimed it in 70 years. Maybe it is time someone understood what it means." Walking to his car, James looks again at the 5 faces. 4 make sense. 1 does not. Whatever happened in 1920, someone went to great effort to hide it. This photograph is proof of something remarkable, something risky. Tomorrow he will visit Evelyn Price. Tonight he will start researching. The mystery has captured him, an untold story waiting to come to light, a truth hidden for 100 years. In his hotel room that evening, James opens his laptop and begins searching. He starts with the 1920 census for Greenwood, Mississippi. He quickly finds Samuel Johnson, age 32, black carpenter, homeowner. Clara Johnson, age 29, seamstress. 2 daughters, Ruth, age 10, and Dorothy, age 8. 2 daughters. No son, no Thomas. James checks birth records next, searching for any Thomas born in Leflore County between 1912 and 1914. He finds several, but cross-referencing shows they are all listed with their own families. None vanished into a black family's photograph. He emails his research assistant in Chicago. "Need death records for Leflore County, 1918-1920. White couples dying close together, especially with young children. Also search orphanage records." Returning to newspaper archives, James scrolls through the Greenwood Commonwealth. Then, on February 3, 1920, he finds it. "Tragic accident," claims local couple. Mr. Robert Hayes, 34, and his wife Margaret, 29, died in a house fire on February 1st. The couple leaves behind 1 son, age 6. 1 son, age 6, the right age for Thomas. James searches for more about the Hayes family, but finds very little. No follow-up stories, no note about what happened to their child. He searches orphanages in Mississippi in 1920. The results are disturbing. A 1921 reform report describes the Greenwood County Children's Home as overcrowded and abusive. Children used as unpaid labor. Children as young as 5 forced to work 10 hours a day. Suspicious disappearances of children said to be adopted, but with no verified records. His assistant emails back, "Found it. Children's Home investigated in 1921. Multiple children missing. Director claimed adoptions, but had no paperwork. No charges filed. Facility closed in 1923. Records incomplete. Large gaps." James creates a timeline. February 1st, 1920. Hayes couple dies. February 3rd, 1920. Newspaper report mentions orphaned son. March 14th, 1920. Johnson family photo with white boy named Thomas. 6 weeks between the fire and the photograph, James studies the image again. Samuel's protective hand on Thomas's shoulder. Clara's steady eyes. What did they risk? He finds the Johnson property record. 412 Elm Street, purchased in 1918. As midnight nears, James makes a quiet promise to the 5 faces in the photograph. He will tell their story. He will find Thomas's descendants and reveal the truth hidden for a century, no matter what it takes. Magnolia Gardens Care Home sits beneath old oak trees, covered with Spanish moss. James arrives at 10 a.m., carrying the photograph and a voice recorder. Evelyn Price waits in the sunroom, a small woman with sharp eyes behind thin wire-rimmed glasses. At 93, her memory is still strong. "You are the genealogist," she says. "Sit down. My knees fail me, but my mind works just fine." James shows her the photograph. Evelyn takes it with slightly shaking hands, age not emotion, and studies it for a long moment. "Samuel and Clara Johnson," she says softly. "I was 5 or 6, but I remember them. My mother knew Clara from Mount Zion Baptist Church. Do you remember this photograph being taken?" "I remember." The whispers. People were afraid. Having that boy in the picture was dangerous, but Samuel insisted. He said if something happened, there needed to be proof the child lived. Proof someone loved him. James leans closer. "How did they come to have him?" Evelyn looks out the window. "You must understand. In 1920 Mississippi, a black person could be killed for looking at a white person the wrong way. Touching a white child, that was asking for a rope in a tree. But they did it anyway. The boy's parents died in that fire, the Hayes family. Poor white folks. When they passed, no one wanted him. He had no close relatives. The orphanage, the Greenwood County Children's Home, we all knew what that place was. Children went in broken, if they came out at all. They worked them hard, beat them, starved them. Some simply vanished. How did the Johnsons become involved? Samuel was working near where the Hayes lived. The day after the fire, he saw the boys sitting alone on the burned steps of the house. The county officials were coming to take him to the children's home. Samuel went home and told Clara. My mother said Clara cried. They had 2 daughters and knew how risky it would be. But Clara said she could not let a child go to that place, no matter his color. She said God would judge them if they turned away. Evelyn's voice grows stronger. So they took him. In the middle of the night before the county came, they brought him home. How did they hide him? They told people he was Clara's nephew visiting from up north, a mixed-race child who could pass for white. It was barely believable, but people did not look too closely if you gave them an explanation. Our community knew the truth. The black community protected them. We all kept the secret. For how long? Almost 2 years. They called him Thomas. He played with Ruth and Dorothy, went to church, learned carpentry from Samuel. A sweet boy. My mother used to say, why risk taking this picture? Samuel wanted evidence. If they were caught, arrested, or killed, he wanted proof the boy existed, that he was loved and part of a family. He saved money for months. The photographer, Albert Crawford, was white but fair-minded. Samuel told him the truth. Crawford could have reported them. Instead, he took the picture and charged half price. He said it was the bravest act he had ever witnessed. What happened to Thomas? Evelyn's expression turned sad. By 1922, it became too dangerous. He looked clearly white as he grew older. The Ku Klux Klan was active that year. Threats and violence increased. Clara had a cousin in Chicago named Diane Porter, married to a white man who was a union organizer. They sent Thomas north in June 1922. Clara cried for days. Did they remain in contact? Secret letters for years? Thomas wrote. When he was older, he said he remembered them and was thankful. After Samuel died in 1935, the letters slowly stopped. Ruth burned them after Clara died in 1947. She thought it was safer that way. Evelyn hands back the photograph. It is time this story is known. Samuel and Clara risked everything to save a child who was not theirs, who did not look like them, in a time when that could have cost them their lives. Find Thomas's family. Tell them what happened. Make sure people understand that even in the darkest times, some people chose love instead of fear. James promises he will. Mount Zion Baptist Church still stands on Elm and 3rd, a modest brick building with a white steeple. James arrives Tuesday afternoon and meets Patricia Lewis, the church secretary. I am researching the Johnson family from the 1920s, James explains. Patricia's eyes widen. Samuel and Clara, she says softly. Let me get Pastor Williams. Pastor Marcus Williams, a tall man in his 50s, studies the photograph carefully. His expression becomes serious when he notices Thomas, and he understands that the past is about to speak again. Patricia and James share a quick look. Come with me, the pastor says softly. He guides James down to the church basement archive, where shelves are filled with old record books and faded papers. Pastor Williams takes out a thick ledger labeled 1918 and 1925. We have kept careful records since 1912, he explains. The reverend in the 1920s was Walter Thompson. He was very detailed with his writing. He also kept private notes about delicate matters. Williams slowly opens the ledger and turns the fragile pages. Here, March 1920, he says, pointing to an entry. Samuel and Clara Johnson with daughters Ruth and Dorothy and Ward Thomas, age 6. Family portrait commissioned. May God protect them in their righteous undertaking. A ward, James says quietly. That ma tutters. Reverend Thompson knew. Williams nods and says, the entire church knew. Look at this. He flips through more pages showing notes from church meetings, money collected for the Johnson family, and prayers said for their safety. April 1920. Pray for the Johnson family's protection. September 1920. Collection for Johnson household needs. December 1921. Pray for wisdom about the child's future. The whole congregation was part of it. James understands they protected that family together. Williams explains that the black community there understood what Samuel and Clara had done, and why. They built a wall of silence around them. Patricia brings another box. The Reverend's personal journals, she says. He wrote about it many times. James reads the entries, feeling more emotional with each line. March 15th, 1920. Samuel Johnson came to me worried. He has taken in the Hayes child, knowing the danger. I asked him why he would risk everything. He said, Reverend, I looked into that boy's eyes and saw my own daughters. I could not send him to die slowly in that place. Clara agrees. They ask only for the church's prayers. I give them my blessing and my silence. Another entry reads, June 1921. The boy Thomas grows strong with the Johnsons. He calls them Mama and Papa. He does not know that the color of his skin matters to the world, only that he is loved. This is what true Christianity means. Then, May 1922, Clara cries, they must send Thomas north. It is too dangerous now. The Klan marches openly. I pray God protects this child and remembers this family's sacrifice. With permission, James photographs every page, his hands trembling. This is proof no one knew existed, evidence of one of the most brave and compassionate acts in American history. There is one more thing, Pastor Williams says. He opens a small wooden box and takes out a delicate envelope. This was kept with the Reverend's belongings, opened only by him. Inside is a letter dated July 1922, from Chicago. The handwriting is careful but clearly a child's. Dear Reverend Thompson, Mama Diane says I should write to say I arrived safely. I miss Mama Clara and Papa Samuel and Ruth and Dorothy very much. Mama Diane is kind, and Uncle James too. They say I can attend school here. I will never forget my family in Greenwood. Please tell them I love them. Thomas. James feels tears on his face. Pastor Williams' eyes are wet as well. This remains in our archive, Williams says firmly. But you have my permission to share this story. The world should know what Samuel and Clara Johnson did. Back in Chicago, James throws himself into city records, searching for Diane Porter. He begins with the 1920 census, looking for black women named Diane married to white men on the South Side. He finds her, Diane Porter, age 26, married to James Porter, age 29. Occupation, union organizer. Address, 4773 South Indiana Avenue. The 1930 census shows them still there, now with 2 children of their own, and a third child listed as nephew, Thomas Hayes, age 16. There he is, hidden in plain sight, recorded as a nephew. James tracks Thomas Hayes through the years in Chicago. The path is faint. He seemed to live quietly and avoided attention. But James finds a marriage license from 1935. Thomas Hayes married Anna Schmidt. Occupation, carpenter, just like Samuel had been. Death records show Thomas Hayes died in 1987 in Evanston, Illinois, at age 73. Anna died in 1995. They had 3 children, Robert Hayes, born 1937, Margaret Hayes, born 1939, and Elizabeth Hayes, born 1942. James feels his heart pound. 3 children who would now be in their 80s, possibly still alive, maybe with children and grandchildren who have no idea about their true family story. He searches for Robert Hayes first, the oldest son. Property records show Robert owned a home in Oak Park until 2015 when it was sold. An obituary states Robert Hayes died peacefully at 78, survived by his wife Susan, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. The children are listed as Michael Hayes, Jennifer Hayes, and Thomas Hayes Jr., another Thomas named after his grandfather. James searches online and finds Thomas Hayes Jr., a middle-aged man in Chicago who works as a high school history teacher. His public profile shows family photos, posts about social justice, and pictures from a recent trip to Mississippi visiting civil rights historical sites. James stares at the screen. Thomas Hayes Jr. teaches history, speaks about racial justice, visited Mississippi civil rights landmarks, and does not know that his grandfather was raised by a black family who risked everything to save him. James writes a careful message. Mr. Hayes, my name is James Mitchell. I am a professional genealogist, and I have found information about your grandfather, Thomas Hayes, that I believe you and your family may not know. It is an extraordinary story of courage during a very hard time in American history. Would you be willing to speak with me? I can provide full documentation and proof. He sends it and waits nervously. This is the turning point, when hidden history may finally come into the light after 100 years. 2 days later, Thomas Hayes Jr. replies, Mr. Mitchell, your message has made me very curious. My grandfather rarely spoke about his childhood. He said his parents died when he was young, and that he was raised by relatives in Chicago. We never knew much more. I would like to hear what you discovered. Can we meet? They arrange to meet at a cafe in downtown Chicago. James arrives early, anxious, carrying a folder with copies of everything, the photograph, Evelyn's testimony typed out, church records, census papers, and old newspaper articles about the Hayes fire. Thomas Hayes Jr. arrives exactly on time, a tall man in his late 40s with graying hair, kind eyes, and an open, thoughtful face. He dresses casually and carries a worn leather messenger bag. They shake hands and sit down. I will be honest, Mr. Mitchell, Thomas says. I am skeptical but interested. My family history has always been unclear. Grandpa Thomas died when I was 10. He was quiet and gentle, but never spoke about his past. He only said his childhood was hard and that he preferred to look ahead, not back. James opens the folder and carefully takes out the 1920 photograph. He slides it across the table. "This is your grandfather," he says, pointing to the young white boy, age 6 or 7, March 1920, Greenwood, Mississippi. Thomas looks at the photo, his face changing from confusion to shock. "These people are a black family." "Yes," James replies. "Samuel and Clara Johnson with their daughters Ruth and Dorothy, and your grandfather Thomas Hayes." Thomas whispers, "I do not understand." James tells him everything, beginning with finding the photograph, sharing Evelyn's testimony, showing the church records, explaining the fire that killed Robert and Margaret Hayes, describing the orphanage and what would have happened to a 6-year-old boy sent there. Thomas listens as his emotions grow stronger with every detail. When James finishes, silence fills the space between them. "My grandfather was raised by a black family," Thomas finally says, his voice heavy, "in Mississippi in 1920. For almost 2 years, Samuel and Clara Johnson risked their lives and their daughters' lives to save him. They hid him, protected him, loved him. Then when it became too dangerous, they sent him to Clara's cousin Diane in Chicago, and that is how he ended up here." Tears run down Thomas's face. "He never told us. Why would H.E. keep this from us?" "Maybe shame," James says gently, "or maybe protection." Even decades later, in the 1960s and 70s, racial tension was strong. Maybe he thought this story could cause trouble, or maybe he wanted to protect Samuel and Clara's memory. Or maybe it simply hurt too much to remember. He lost his birth parents in a fire, then lost his adoptive parents when he was 8. That is a great deal of loss for a child. Thomas wipes his eyes. "May I?" he asks, reaching for the photograph with shaking hands. James gives it to him. Thomas studies every small detail. Samuel's protective hand on young Thomas's shoulder, Clara's calm, steady gaze, the 2 girls standing beside him. "They saved him," Thomas whispers. "They saved my grandfather, which means they saved all of us. My father, me, my children. None of us would be here without their courage." "That is true," James says softly. Thomas looks up. "Are there any descendants from the Johnson family?" "I believe so," James answers. "I have not traced them fully yet. I wanted to find you first. But Ruth and Dorothy both had children. There is a family tree that connects to yours through the years 1920 to 1922, connected by love instead of blood." Thomas places the photograph down carefully. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to tell my family, my siblings, my cousins. We need to know this story." He takes a deep breath. "And I want to find the Johnson descendants. I want to thank them in some way for what their ancestors did." "I hoped you would say that," James replies. They speak for 2 more hours. James shares every document and each piece of proof. Thomas asks careful questions, takes pictures, and writes notes. As a historian by training and career, he wants to understand and confirm everything, to make sense of this discovery that has changed his family's history forever. When they stand to leave, Thomas holds James's hand firmly and says with deep feeling, "Thank you. Thank you for uncovering this, for caring enough to look into it, for bringing this to me. This is the most important thing I have ever discovered about my family." "There is one more thing," James says. He takes out the letter young Thomas wrote to Reverend Thompson in 1922. "Your grandfather wrote this only 2 months after he arrived in Chicago. He was just 7 years old." Thomas reads it, and when he finishes, he is crying again. He loved them. He called them Mama and Papa. He never forgot them. We allowed this story to fade away. Thomas folds the letter slowly and carefully. "If that can change now, will you help me find the Johnson family?" "Absolutely." James goes back to his research with fresh determination. He needs to locate the descendants of Ruth and Dorothy Johnson, the 2 girls in the photograph, who grew up knowing they had once shared their home with a white boy their parents rescued. He begins with Ruth, the older daughter. In the 1930 census, Ruth Johnson, age 20, is still living with her parents in Greenwood, but by 1940 she is no longer there, most likely married. James searches marriage records for Leflore County, Mississippi, between 1930 and 1940. He finds it. Ruth Johnson married William Crawford in 1933. Crawford, the same last name as the photographer who took the 1920 portrait. James looks deeper and uncovers the connection. William Crawford was the son of Albert Crawford. The photographer who recorded the Johnson family's bravery had a son who later fell in love with Ruth Johnson and married her. They had 4 children: Albert Jr., Clara, named after Ruth's mother, Samuel, named after Ruth's father, and Mary. James traces their lives forward. Clara Crawford, born in 1937, married Jerome Washington in 1958 and moved to Memphis. They had 3 children, including a daughter named Rue. T.H. Washington, born in 1962. James finds Ruth Washington on social media. She is 63 years old, a retired teacher living in Memphis. She often posts about family, church, and civil rights history. He sends her a message similar to the one he sent Thomas Hayes Jr., explaining that he has uncovered an extraordinary story about her great-grandparents. Ruth Washington replies within a few hours, "My grandmother Ruth told me stories when I was young about something secret my great-grandparents did. Something brave. She said I would understand when I was older, but she passed away before she could explain." Is this about that? James arranges a phone call. When they speak, he tells her everything and shows her the photographs and documents through a video call. Ruth Washington listens with her hand over her mouth, tears running down her face. "They saved a white child," she whispers, "in Mississippi in 1920. Oh, my Lord. Your grandmother Ruth knew him. She was 10 years old when he came to live with them. She would have remembered it all. She never told us the details. She only said her parents did something risky and good, something that showed what true Christianity meant. We always wondered." James then tells her about Thomas Hayes Jr., about finding the grandson of the boy her great-grandparents saved. "He wants to meet you," James says. "He wants to thank your family for what Samuel and Clara did." Ruth Washington is quiet for a moment, overwhelmed. 100 years later, she finally says, "The family is coming back together after a century, if you are willing." Of course I am willing. This is everything my grandmother hoped for. I believe she wanted this story to be shared. She wanted people to know what her parents did. James then searches for Dorothy's descendants. Dorothy Johnson married Marcus Lewis in 1935 and moved to Chicago during the Great Migration in 1942. They had 5 children, and one of them, Patricia Lewis, born in 1945, still lives in Chicago. James suddenly realizes something. Patricia Lewis is the mother of Pastor Marcus Williams, the church secretary and pastor at Mount Zion Baptist Church, the same man who helped him find the church records. They are descendants of the Johnson family. They already knew parts of the story. They had been protecting it, keeping it safe, waiting for the right time. James calls Pastor Williams. "You knew," he says. "You are Dorothy Johnson's grandson." "I am," Williams confirms. "My grandmother Dorothy told my mother everything before she died, and my mother told me. We have been waiting for someone to connect all the pieces. Someone from outside who could tell this story the right way. Why did you not tell me from the beginning? Because the story needed to be uncovered, not simply handed over. You found the photograph. You tracked down Evelyn. You connected the facts. That gives it truth. It makes it real. If we had just told you, it might have sounded like a family legend, made bigger over time. This way, you proved everything on your own." James understands. Thomas Hayes Jr. wants to meet the family. Ruth Washington in Memphis as well. "Then we will make it happen," Pastor Williams says. "We will bring everyone together. The descendants of Samuel and Clara Johnson, and the descendants of the boy they saved. This is what my great-grandparents would have wanted." 3 months later, on a warm Saturday in June, 2 families gather at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Greenwood, Mississippi. Ruth Washington arrives from Memphis with her 3 children and 2 grandchildren. Pastor Marcus Williams is there with his extended family, 7 descendants of Dorothy Johnson. Other Johnson relatives travel from across the country, nearly 30 people in total. Thomas Hayes Jr. brings his entire family too, his 2 sisters, his children, his cousins, his nieces and nephews, 23 people who carry the blood of the boys Samuel and Clara Johnson rescued in 1920. The church sanctuary is full. No media are invited. This moment is private and sacred. James Mitchell stands at the front with Pastor Williams. Between them, shown on a large screen, is the 1920 photograph. Samuel, Clara, Ruth, Dorothy, and young Thomas. Thomas Hayes, Jr., speaks first. His voice trembles with emotion. I am standing here today because of an act of incredible courage and love. My grandfather, Thomas Hayes, lost his parents in a fire when he was 6 years old. He should have been sent to an orphanage where he might have died or been mistreated. Instead, two people, Samuel and Clara Johnson, risked everything to protect him. He looks at the Johnson descendants sitting before him. They were not wealthy. They were not powerful. They were a black family in Jim Crow, Mississippi, which meant they lived every day under the threat of violence. Taking in a white child could have cost them their lives, and they did it anyway. Thomas pauses to steady himself. My grandfather lived to be 73 years old. He married my grandmother, raised my father and his siblings, and saw his grandchildren born. He worked as a carpenter, a skill he learned from Samuel Johnson. He lived a good, simple, honorable life. All of us are here because of what your ancestors did. He steps down and walks toward Ruth Washington. I do not have words strong enough to thank you, but I want you to know we will never forget this. We will share this story with our children and grandchildren. We will make sure Samuel and Clara Johnson's bravery is always remembered. Ruth Washington hugs him, and both of them cry. Around the sanctuary, almost everyone is in tears. Pastor Williams speaks next. My great-grandparents, Samuel and Clara Johnson, were ordinary people who did something, extraordinary. They saw a child in danger and answered with love, even though it put them at risk. That is the simple and powerful truth of this story. He points to the photograph on the screen. This picture was taken as proof, as evidence that Thomas was real and that he was loved. Samuel knew it was risky to record what they had done, but he insisted. He wanted there to be a record, even if it brought danger. And now, 100 years later, that photograph has reunited our families. Ruth Washington then shares the stories her grandmother Ruth told her, memories of young Thomas playing with her, and Dorothy learning carpentry from Samuel, helping Clara in the garden. My grandmother said Thomas was quiet at first, hurt deeply by losing his parents. But slowly, over time, he began to smile again, to laugh. She said Clara would hold him and sing to him, and Samuel taught him how to measure wood and use tools. They loved him as their own child. She pauses. And when they had to send him away because it became too dangerous, my grandmother said her mother cried for weeks. Clara never stopped thinking about him, wondering if he was safe, if he was happy. She kept hoping for letters, for news. She received some secretly for years, until one day the letters stopped. Thomas Hayes, Jr. stands once more. I have something to show you. He takes out a small box he brought with him. When my grandfather passed away, we found this in his attic. We never understood what it meant, but now we do. He opens the box. Inside is a small wooden toy, a carved horse made smooth by time and years of handling. Samuel Johnson made this for my grandfather. We know because there are tiny letters, S.J., carved under the base. My grandfather kept it his whole life, 73 years. He kept this toy. He kept this connection to the family who saved him. He hands the toy to Pastor Williams. This bell ongs with your family's history. It proves he never forgot them, just as they never forgot him. The two families talk, share memories, and embrace people who were once strangers by blood, but are now connected by something stronger than genetics. They are joined by sacrifice and love across the color line during one of the darkest periods in American history. James watches everything, taking photographs and writing notes, seeing history set right. After the gathering, Thomas Hayes, Jr. and Pastor Marcus Williams speak to reporters outside the church. The story has spread. Too many people knew about the reunion, and now journalists from across the country have come to Greenwood. Thomas faces the cameras. In 1920, my grandfather, Thomas Hayes, lost his parents in a fire. He was 6 years old, alone, and about to be sent to a cruel orphanage. A black family named Johnson took him in, hid him, protected him, and loved him at great risk to themselves. Today, our families reunited to honor that brave act. He lifts up the 1920 photograph. This moment is living proof that courage and love can cross any line, even in the hardest times. The picture was taken as evidence, as proof that a child had lived and truly mattered. Samuel and Clara Johnson wanted people to know they had loved this boy, even if loving him cost them everything. 100 years later, their wish has finally come true. The world now knows, and the story spreads everywhere. Big newspapers print it. Television channels talk about it. Social media fills with shares and comments. The photograph of Samuel, Clara, and the children is seen by millions of people. The reaction is powerful. People feel touched, inspired, and challenged. In the many comments and talks that follow, people speak about racism, bravery, kindness, and what it really means to do the right thing even when it is dangerous. Some people question it. Why focus on a black family saving a white child? What about all the black children who also needed help? It is a fair and honest question, and Pastor Williams answers it clearly during interviews. This story does not erase other struggles, he says firmly. Samuel and Clara Johnson's daughters, my grandmother and my great-aunt, lived with racism their whole lives. The Johnson family understood oppression deeply. That is what makes their decisions so meaningful. In spite of everything they faced, in spite of the risk, they chose love. They chose to protect a child who would grow up with advantages they would never know. This is not saying racism did not matter. It shows that their humanity rose above it. Thomas Hayes Jr. also speaks openly. I grew up white in America with all the benefits that came with it. My grandfather was white too. Our family gained from unfair systems for generations, but none of us would be here if a black family had not shown incredible courage. He often adds, that is a debt we can never fully repay. The best way to honor it is to fight the systems that made their brave act so risky in the first place. Together, the Hayes and Johnson families create a foundation in the names of Samuel and Clara Johnson. The foundation gives scholarships to foster children and supports changes in child welfare laws. The 1920 photograph is given to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. It is displayed there with the full story, standing as a witness to courage, love, and the best parts of human nature. James Mitchell writes a detailed book about the disco, and about both families. He carefully records every fact and memory. The money from the book sales is shared between the Johnson and Hayes descendants. Mount Zion Baptist Church becomes a place people travel to visit. Visitors come from all over the country to see where Samuel and Clara prayed, to walk the same roads they once walked, and to honor their bravery. The house at 412 Elm Street, which had been empty for years, is bought by the foundation. It is repaired and turned into a museum and learning center. Visitors are taught about racism during the Jim Crow years and about the quiet but powerful acts of resistance shown by ordinary people. Years later, James thinks about what this story truly means. Samuel and Clara Johnson were not famous, he tells a reporter. They did not lead marches or stand at podiums. They were working people trying to live in a harsh and unfair system. But when they had to choose between ignoring a child's pain or risking everything to help, they chose love. That is real heroism. Not loud or dramatic, but the kind that changes the world, one life at a time. Thomas Hayes Jr., now in his 60s, speaks at schools and churches. He shares his grandfather's story and the sacrifice of the Johnson family. My grandfather survived because two people cared more about a child's life than about their own safety, he says. That is the kind of America I want to see. A place where we notice each other's humanity first, where we are willing to take risks for one another, where love is stronger than fear. The Johnson descendants carry their family history with pride. Ruth Washington's granddaughter, who studies social work, says, I am not surprised Samuel and Clara acted the way they did. When I look at their photograph, I see it in their eyes. Strength, kindness, determination. They raised their daughters with those same values. It is part of who we are. It has been passed down. 5 years after the first reunion, the families gather again, this time for a joyful reason. Thomas Hayes Jr.'s daughter, Sarah, is marrying Marcus Williams III, the grandson of Pastor Williams. The wedding takes place at Mount Zion Baptist Church, the same church where Samuel and Clara worshipped, where Reverend Thompson once recorded their brave choice, and where the two families reunited after a century apart. The church is decorated with photographs from many generations, Samuel and Clara, with young Thomas in 1920. Thomas Hayes as a grown man with his wife and children. The Johnson family members through the years. And now this day, when two families are joined not only by history but by love. During the ceremony, Sarah and Marcus honor their ancestors. They place flowers in front of a portrait of Samuel and Clara Johnson, recognizing that without them, neither family would be standing there. Love brought us together 2 times, Marcus says in his vows. First in 1920, when my great-great-grandparents saved Sarah's great-grandfather, and now, in 2025, when we choose each other and carry their legacy forward. A legacy of love that rises above every barrier. The reception is full of happiness and celebration. Members of the Hayes and Johnson families dance together, tell stories, and strengthen the bond that began 5 years earlier. The racial divide that once made their connection almost impossible now feels far away, replaced by shared history and chosen family. James Mitchell, a 10 DS, as a special guest. Now in his mid-40s, he has built his career around telling this story. But his greatest joy comes from watching these families grow together. This is what I hoped would happen, he tells Ruth Washington, who is now 71, not only discovering the past, but helping to heal it and carry it into the future. You returned our history to us, Ruth says. We always believed Samuel and Clara were remarkable people, but we did not know everything. Now we know, and now the world knows too. At the end of the evening, everyone gathers outside for a new photograph. Dozens of descendants from both families stand together in front of the same church that once protected a secret. Someone holds up the original 1920 photograph. 100 years stand between the two images, but the connection remains strong. Thomas Hayes Jr. looks closely at the old picture one last time. He studies his grandfather's young face and sees Samuel's steady hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Thank you, he whispers softly to the faces from long ago. Thank you for all of it. Later that night, Sarah and Marcus walk to the church cemetery to visit Samuel and Clara's graves. The headstones, once forgotten and worn, have been cleaned and restored. Fresh flowers are placed there, often by family members. We are going to name our first child after them, Sarah says quietly. Samuel if it is a boy, Clara if it is a girl. So their names continue. So they are always remembered. Marcus gently takes her hand. They will not be forgotten. Their story is written in history now. They stand together in silence, honoring the courage that made their lives possible. Above them, the stars shine over Mississippi. The same stars that looked down on Samuel and Clara Johnson in 1920 when they made their impossible decision. The same stars that now shine on their children and grandchildren living in a future shaped by that brave act. A photograph taken in 1920 once held a mystery no one could fully explain. A century later, that mystery has been uncovered. It revealed a story of courage, sacrifice, and love that broke through some of the cruelest barriers ever built between people. Samuel and Clara Johnson risked everything to protect a child who was not their own. They asked for nothing. They expected no praise, no reward, no public honor. They acted because it was right, because a child needed care, because love required action. Now their story will continue to be told. It stands as a reminder that even in the darkest times, even within unfair and broken systems, simple acts of bravery and kindness can change the course of history. The photograph remains in the Smithsonian, viewed by thousands every year, but its real legacy lives on in the families themselves. Hayes and Johnson, white and black, forever connected by an act of love that refused to obey the color line. This is the mystery answered. That humanity at its best is stronger than hate. This is the truth revealed. That true love does not see skin color. It sees only a child who needs protection and the courage to step forward. Samuel and Clara Johnson are no longer here, but their legacy lives on in their descendants, in the family they saved, and in every person who hears their story and decides to be brave, to be kind, and to choose love over fear.